It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality. I am Megan Bonner, and joining me as always is my co-host, Christy Powell.
Howdy.
And joining us today is Melissa Carnagey. I said that right, didn't I?
You did.
Oh, thank you. All right, so you are the founder of Sex Positive Families?
I am, yes.
And we'll be talking to you today about a wide range of issues, but the main thing is going to be developing a sex-positive culture for your family and for children in the world today.
Yes. So it's not just for parents. Raising sexually healthy children is a call for all of us, right? And we'll talk about that.
Yes. So, Christy, did you have any questions? Here, let me help you with this.
Yeah, I mean, I just was curious how you got into this and, why this became kind of your calling and your business.
My jam?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am a social worker. And so when I was in undergrad, I went to St. Ed's. When I was in undergrad, we actually had to write a paper, and it was, and do some research around certain populations. And through a draw of a hat, I drew HIV/AIDS as the population that I had to research. And in doing that research and interviewing local AIDS service organizations, I learned a lot about how disproportionately the Black community is impacted by HIV. A bit that I knew, but it's just when you get into like the research and stuff behind it, not just like what you see on TV.
Really shocked by the actual numbers.
Data.
Yeah. And myself being a Black person, a person of color, I was like, this is ridiculous. So I felt a call to work in that particular realm. And so then I did internships and then worked. And so for a decade, my career was in adult sexual health around HIV. And then I kind of hit like a wall of, like, I'd been a nonprofit, I worked for state government, and then just kind of being in government,
Yeah, I mean, that's exhausting work.
I kind of felt like,
Slogging.
there's a wall around you, and there are limits to things you can say and things you can do, and so I just felt like I had a bigger impact that was just waiting, and my creativity was really being stifled. And so a couple of years ago, I took a leap out of that, and I, felt that I really wanted to work with families, and I really wanted to work with parents because of a lot of stories that I was hearing from the adults that I was working with. A lot of their sexual decision making and issues that they had around their bodies and sexuality and abuse and trauma scenarios went back to their childhood and things that went on when they were younger. I'm also a parent, and so that definitely informs the work that I do. I have a 20-year-old; she'll be 20 next month, and so I've been parenting for 20 years, and also a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old bonus son. So
I like when you say bonus.
Yes, my partner's son, and so my bonus son. And so, raising children with an awareness of their bodies, of their sexuality, their gender identity, all those things I live every day. And so helping to share that knowledge and share knowledge from, my professional background, all of these things is what has made Sex Positive Families, what it is today. And it's growing. There's just such a supportive community around this. A lot of people are really wanting to do better than they may have experienced, for their children.
And I also want to point out that though, the sex-positive families, but, that is, of course, children, but it's, like you touched on, it's also the adults. There are so many adults who, for whatever reason, whether it be the religious circumstance that they were raised in or traumatic instances, really have no clue about their own bodies or about sex or sexuality. We do our best on this show to be as educational as we can and as accepting as we can for that very reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a therapist, part of me wonders if, your work continues if I'll be out of a job in 20 years, because so much of what I do is helping people heal and repair those early experiences and not having the language, not knowing how to communicate those things, not having a framework for how to even think about them at a young age.
Yeah. I always hope that I will be out of a job, that we will be out of a job. When I worked in the field of HIV, that was like the thing, like, I hope that we don't have to do this work anymore, because there's a cure, there's support, there's no stigma, same thing.
We've made advancements.
Yeah. And Yeah, it's such a pervasive thing. Whether again it's the religious shame, repression, and sex is so sexualized, and adult sexuality is often projected, and eroticism is projected when it comes to thinking about children, and so it creates this layer of taboo, this layer of silence around talking about sexual health issues, because talking about sex and talking about sexual health is really like sexual health is an umbrella.
Right. Sure.
And so consent, that's definitely been a hot topic item with the Me Too movement. So there are just so many ways in which our current culture is really awakening to the fact that we need to start these conversations a lot earlier.
So, Christy, before I get into Community Corkboard, did you have another question, and then I'll get into Community Corkboard?
Yeah, no, I think that all of that is really beautiful. I mean, just the work that you're doing, it feels in a lot of ways with what's been going on politically and in so many other places, there almost just feels like an air of defeat around so many of these topics. I mean, there was a lot of excitement around the Me Too movement and these different things, but also a lot of just frustration. But I gotta say, I feel a lot of hope. When I talk to kids, and especially around issues of like homosexuality in particular, how there's just not maybe the struggle that a lot of people were having 20 years ago when they were hitting those teenage years and starting to come alive to those things. So I don't know how you feel about the direction things are headed, but I'd like to be hopeful.
Yeah, no, I'm extremely hopeful. So aside from doing sex-positive families, my kind of primary, paid job is as a sex educator. So I teach youth. So every week I'm in classrooms. This semester I have 6th, 7th, and 12th graders. And so I wish so much that parents and adults could be flies on the wall in these experiences. These young people have so much insight and so many amazing curiosities, but often not a safe landing space for these things. But around gender identity and LGBTQ plus inclusivity, we have a generation coming up now that has a lot more awareness of the fact that the gender is a spectrum, and a lot more openness to sexual orientation and the diversity around that. And it's really the adults, who may be in their lives, they're acting as gatekeepers, not all of them, but, you definitely can see, enough of them in certain young people's lives. But, when I talk about the gender unicorn and, I teach about that, there's so many of them that are like, pansexual, demisexual, like they know these terms, that I didn't know. They weren't introduced to me. Gender queer,
I was reading them
non-binary.
in books during my, graduate work.
Right. They were not available when I was in 6th or 7th grade. That was not discussed. But media is definitely an influencer now. And YouTube is very accessible to young people. And so there are so many queer folk that have amazing YouTube channels, and young people, queer teens, that are just leading the charge around these normalizing and creating inclusive, safe, affirming spaces for young people.
Well, beautiful. We would love to hear your questions. We're definitely going to be taking calls, a number right there on your screen. So go ahead and dial in as we get started.
And that number, if you are not looking at your screen, is 512-686-0279. I have memorized it now.
Heyo.
And please do call in, like Christy said, with any of your questions, comments. It does not have to be on this subject exactly, but today's topic is about sex positivity and sex-positive families. So any questions, comments, suggestions, or stories you want to share, feel free. Community Corkboard today is, let's see here. Christy, you did a Discord Q&A.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Our resident, I guess, Discord leader, Pine Snake, Ian, thank you so much. Was a wonderful host, and I had a great time, to be honest with you. It was really fun being on the other side of the interview microphone.
Right.
So yeah, that's in our Discord channel. I definitely would encourage everybody to check out all of the past interviews and all the other folks that have done those Q&As. They're a really good time.
And after that, we have Atheist Day is coming up on March 23rd, Saturday. So get ready for that. That's when we're all going to come out and be proud with our green whatevers. 'Cause
Get your whatever's ready.
Your green whatever's ready, and march proudly. There we go. We will be having some events both on the state capitol or the steps of the state capitol, and some events afterwards. So it should be a good time all
Circle
around.
your calendar.
Yeah. Another date to circle is going to be Easter weekend. We are going to be attending the American Atheist Convention 2019 in Cincinnati, Ohio. So look for us there. And lastly, the February newsletter / magazine is out. And if you are watching us on YouTube, there is a picture of that and its many articles on the screen. And it just looks very, very wonderful. I have to get my copy. If you have not signed up to get a copy, sign up now. And I think that is everything on the community corkboard.
Okay, well, great. If you're ready, we can jump into the interview a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so really, Melissa, I wanted to ask about, we talked about how things seem to be moving in the right direction, how kids seem to be understanding a lot of these things because of the way our culture and media is addressing them. But when we're talking specifically about sex ed, I'm really curious about the horror stories I'm hearing coming out of schools, out of our state legislature. It feels like we're more focused on who's peeing in which bathroom than we are in actually empowering and educating children.
And abstinence-only education, which, as we know, is not education.
Yeah. It's been proven ineffective.
Yeah.
Many times over in terms of the research. So.
Am I right to feel like things are going pretty poorly right now, or where are things headed?
So yes, politics, of course, drive this in a lot of ways. And, us being here in Texas, we are at a disadvantage, even though Austin kind of can be in its own little bubble, but still, in terms of Texas, we are... So I have a few stats that I'd like to share with you,
yes.
Because
Nothing a skeptic loves more than like a good metric measure. Give us some stats.
Yeah. So these come from the Guttmacher Institute. So if anyone wants to check them out, but essentially, remember, how many states do we have? Let's set that straight first.
50.
Oh, okay. Yes.
that in mind.
I was like, are you actually asking this question? Okay.
I just want to say
Sorry.
before I say all of these,
Okay.
reminding us of how many states we have, because
Okay.
it's going to get sad really quickly here.
Oh, okay.
So 50 states, right? We're all good with that? All right. So 24 states plus the District of Columbia mandate sex ed. Okay. So that means it's not mandatory, right? And Texas does not mandate sex ed, so it's not mandatory to have sex ed in
automatically
schools.
in the bottom half there.
Exactly, as per usual. And so, And so, so it's not mandatory for schools to have sexuality education for young people. So keep that in mind. Only 13 states require that the sex ed that is taught is medically accurate.
Oh my.
Okay, only 13
What
states.
does
And
sex
Texas,
ed look like when it's not medically accurate?
It is, it's not based.
Probably it sounds like most of the sex ed that's being taught.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where you can have maybe things that are more values-based, religion, comes into play in terms of, just the inaccuracies are wild. So only 13, and Texas does not require that it's medically accurate. So then 18 states require, including District of Columbia, require that contraceptive options are taught. So only 18 states, right?
Oh, okie dokie.
Yeah, so no one needs to know about contraception.
Yeah, talking
right?
about sex without talking about contraception, that makes
need to
total
know that.
sense.
Yeah.
Because what they're going for often is abstinence, right? And so when it comes to abstinence, 27, so that's when the number gets higher, 27 states require that the sex ed stresses abstinence. And that's where Texas says yes. Texas
Oh, okay.
says yes,
glad
right.
we came to the conversation for that one.
Yes.
Yeah, glad we really caught up on the... Okay.
No bueno. And then 18 states require instruction on the importance of sex only within the context of marriage. So 18 states, right? No sex outside of marriage. I know this is not a happy conversation. Then 9 states, again, we have 50, right? So 9 states require sexual orientation to be inclusive. Only 9 states, right? And then there are 3 states that require negative information around sexual orientation. And Texas is one of those 3 states. Okay.
So that means that they're explicitly not allowed to discuss orientation issues? Or?
So when they do discuss sexual orientation, it has a negative. So it's not.
It has to
something
have a
that's-
negative connotation.
Yeah, that it's not positively presented. This is not something that they're advocating for, that the curriculum will advocate for in the public schools. Now, I will say this caveat. This means that a lot of schools in Texas are not teaching sex ed at all. And if they are teaching sex ed, then within the school health advisory councils, the SHACs is what they're called, there can be a lot of advocacy done by parents or by the community to try to get certain curricula in. But these are
requires
the
a more
standard.
liberal community.
Population,
More
yeah.
progressive,
Yeah.
So we definitely have conservative lean, and then in terms of just kind of under the Trump administration, they're moving away from what the teen pregnancy prevention, which was what the Obama administration had, and more into what they're calling sexual risk avoidance.
Which just means abstinence.
Yeah, which essentially means that they want sexuality educators to teach teens not to have sex. So it's like DARE for sex.
Right.
Because
Yeah,
that
super
worked out
effective.
so well for
Right.
drugs to begin with.
Right. So just some stats.
Come on, U.S., get your head out of your ass. Come on.
Yeah, so those are obviously some devastating factoids. But what I guess I'm wondering is, how do they compare to, say, 10 or 20 years ago? I mean, is there any room for hope? Is there positive growth of any kind?
Yeah. I mean, we have the hope of moving in a better direction. There are a lot of comprehensive sexuality education curriculums that can be integrated either privately. There's a lot more awareness. So a lot of families are moving outside of just relying on the public school system. And so there are a lot of community-based organizations or programs being taught privately through those, and through nonprofit organizations. And so there's much more of like a grassroots effort happening, because again, we have a lot of adults who are acknowledging that the sex ed that they got, that was very fear-based, that was showing these horrific pictures of STIs,
Right.
Which I tell my students all the time. I say, what's the most common symptom of an STI? Do y'all know the answer to that? What's the most common symptom of an
common?
STI?
If you actually present with a symptom.
Yeah. So no symptom at all.
Yeah,
That's
basically.
the most common symptom. So when we're showing these pictures, of these outbreaks,
Warts and boils.
right?
And, yeah.
When we're showing these pictures, then we are setting an unsafe and unrealistic expectation, because then there's that whole perception again of clean. I don't like to use that; it's very sex negative.
Sure.
But this perception of like, well, you don't look like you have anything.
So
I
you
don't
must be
look like.
fine.
Yeah, I don't look like I have anything. And so it's just breaking down these myths and these taboos and helping them to understand. And especially with porn is just such an accessible tool that is available. Mainstream porn. There's a lot of great, wonderful, beautiful, ethical porn being made right now. But that's not the stuff that's free. That's
Right.
not the
That's
stuff.
not the stuff that teenagers are finding.
Exactly, and so then they're searching for these things. This is where they're learning, about this. In my time, it was like HBO Real Sex. I don't know if y'all saw that show.
Oh yeah, no, I remember.
Yeah, so that was my sex ed, because I did have sex was not a topic that was talked about. It was shamed. But now they have porn, and they all have phones, they all have devices, they have iPads. If they don't have it, and you think as a parent like, oh well, I have good expectations and monitoring on my devices, rest assured, if they go to school outside the home, there are kids that have these.
They're being confronted with it one way or the other.
Exactly. So we have to have these conversations and make it normalized and safe for them to talk about these things with trusted adults.
And knowledgeable adults.
Yes. Which adults of present day have, I always say, have some self-compassion. Again, many of us did not have quality, comprehensive, supportive, inclusive sex ed. And so there's a bit of a learning curve. It's okay. There's no script or there's no set way that you have to talk about these things. Just get the conversation started. And books are such a great way to help support the conversation. There are also YouTube. There's amaze.org, AMAZE, aze.org, and they have a YouTube channel, and they create these really great sex-positive cartoon videos around different topics for teens and tweens and young children. And so there are lots of resources and tools, so parents shouldn't feel like they have to say just the right thing, just say something.
Well, yeah, and as hesitant as I'm sure a lot of parents are in, sharing these videos and, is my kid old enough for this? And those are, I think, important conversations to have, and a lot of discernment is required. But it's, I think, worth noticing that a lot of these teenagers are already looking at Pornhub, so providing them with a YouTube link shouldn't be something we're as hesitant about as we are.
Right. Exactly. They're going to go find these things on their own, these other things. So we want to give them the resources that are trusted, that are reliable, that are medically accurate. Mm-hmm. They're already online. Might as well point them, in the right direction to make it safe for them to be able to do that, because we're just not going to be with them all the time.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. Just to
ahead.
say, as disappointing as sex ed in schools seems to be right now, would you push people towards finding one of those, third-party outside classes? Is that the direction that we should be moving as a society? Is that something that you think is sort of a stopgap for right now? What do you see for the future?
Yeah, I think that parents definitely, if you have kids that are in any kind of school system, then it's really important that you get to know what is my child being taught around these different topics. Sometimes it's just a health class, but not maybe a set curriculum around sex ed or sexuality. And so you won't know until you find out from your particular school. So that's kind of number one, is find out what are they learning and at what point. Because that's the other thing, is that when programs are being taught, many times they're being taught late in the game.
That's right. When you said 12th grade, when you were referencing what grades you work with, I was like, wow, damn, that is pretty freaking late. I mean,
I'll say these particular students received the curriculum also in 10th grade. And so this is, I'll give a lot of props to this particular school. It's a charter school. The program that I teach with teaches in charter schools because it is a little bit more of a progressive curriculum. And so it's a little too progressive for the public schools. But they are just so excited to have us there. And so they're like, we want to get these seniors, even though they had this, 2 years ago, we want to get them now again while they're actually, many of them, in sexual decision making, and before they head off to college, because then college is where
doors open. Yeah, all of a sudden there are
everything.
options.
Yeah. And then there's just not the same level of support or consistent access to information. They might have like the condoms sitting out of the student health center, or you have to like go somewhere to get this information.
Actively go to get it.
Right. But otherwise, it's kind of all around you, these options and these decisions and this independence, and what do you do with it? So my daughter goes to UT San Antonio, and she definitely affirms the fact that, they're not really talking. In college, these conversations aren't happening as much as they are, but the temptation is certainly, there. And there are a lot of young people who are entering
and the need.
Any context.
Yeah, and the need is definitely there. So I want to definitely return to this, but I do see that we do have a caller on the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
And was hoping to get to that caller. First, though, we do have lines open, so if you have any questions, please give us a call at 512-686-0279, and you'll be able to talk to us and today's guest expert. Also, if you don't feel comfortable calling, you can always email us at sex@atheist-community.org. And with that, Kevin, you are on the air.
How y'all doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I actually called in because there's something I've been dealing with for a few years now, and I wanted to basically get some advice on it.
Yeah, of course. What do you got on your mind?
Well, I know the call screener probably told you that I'm having difficulty dealing with my bisexuality, which is basically a big thing with me right now. A little background on myself first. I'm happily married to my wife of almost 5 years now. And we're pretty soon going to have 2 kids together, and I love her to death. But one thing that I'm finding myself struggling with these past couple of years is even though I love getting intimate with her and having sex with her, you know, to be blunt, I guess, is I also find myself in a way craving men and not just women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I don't know if that's actually putting a roadblock in anything. I mean, I've talked to my wife about it before, and you know, she doesn't necessarily like it, but she is supportive of me. I was just wanting to see what y'all's what kind of advice y'all could give for me.
Well, I think first off, to know kind of what direction we're headed in here, we are a very sex and relationship positive show. So are you looking for remaining monogamous with your wife, or are you looking for maybe expanding that relationship out?
Could you tell me what those two words mean, please? Because I'm not familiar with those terms.
Sure. Monogamous would be just you engaging in sexual activity with your wife only. And then opening your marriage up would be maybe an open marriage or a polyamorous relationship, which would be one or both of you or your wife stepping outside of what you would call your marriage to enjoy sexual pleasure with other people.
With consent, with everyone.
Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
and
with
there
consent.
are a number of things in between. I think it's important to point out that everybody's marriage is
Unique.
It not only is it unique, but it's a certain percentage monogamous, right? Everybody, no matter how closed or quote unquote traditional, how exclusive their relationship is, everybody has some level of, okay, it's all right to notice people outside of the marriage, or it's okay to watch pornography of people outside of the marriage, or maybe it's even okay to kiss, or, you know, so there are gradients to these things. So I think the question is, how monogamous is your marriage, and is that something you're looking to change?
Well, I'd say as far as that goes, you know, I've talked to her about it in the past couple of months or so, and basically we basically got to talking about, you know, me possibly finding somebody outside of our relationship to give me what I'm seeking, but we haven't quite made a decision yet. And you know, in the past, you know, I've actually had sex toys that I use to actually give me that. But one problem that I've been struggling with the past year or so is I'm not really sure how to put it, but I guess you could say it's kind of like I'm kind of wanting the real thing, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sex toys are great and self-pleasure is wonderful, but if that's not what you're looking for, then it may just be a stopgap. You know, so that's more than reasonable. And bisexual monogamy is a complicated and sometimes very difficult thing because you are, you know, missing out, if you want to frame it that way, from a very real aspect of your sexuality.
And I think it's wonderful that hearing that your wife is supportive and somebody that you can talk to about this. Big props to her. How does that feel to have her being supportive and open about this with you?
Well, I've known, I'd say probably since around, I want to say somewhere around like my mid-high school years, I've known that I've basically discovered that I was bisexual.
Nice.
So let's say I graduated back in 2012, so I've been like that now for, how many years would that be now?
6.
So
7.
Probably around 7 years I've known. And I think coming into this, she already knew about how I was, but, you know, just due to the relationship connection that me and her sparked up over the years, I mean, like I said before, she didn't necessarily like the idea, but because, you know, we had a connection and we love each other, she was supportive of that.
Sure. She wants you to be happy. She cares about you, and she sees that this is something that is a part of you and part of who you are, and there's nothing wrong, bad, or shameful about that. She sounds like a great support.
Yeah,
she really is, and honestly, that's one of the reasons why I've stayed with her all this time, is because of how great of a partner she is. And one thing that we've been talking about lately, which is one of the reasons why I called into the show to see what kind of advice y'all could give me on it, was we've talked lately again, like I said, about me finding somebody outside our marriage that could give me what it is I'm looking for. Mm-hmm. But another thing that I struggle with is I've never really liked the idea of stepping outside my marriage, and that's I guess what Christy was talking about a stopgap. Mm-hmm. That would be one of the roadblocks that I've faced in recent memory. Is I know what I want to seek, but the problem is, I was raised with the knowledge that when you're married to somebody, you should only be involved with that person, mm-hmm. and only that person. And if you step outside of that marriage, then you're not only being unfaithful to that person, but you're also cheating on them and hurting them. And that's always been a stopgap for me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the standard narrative. That's kind of what so many of us in our culture are raised to believe. And the good news is you get to choose whether or not that's the type of marriage you want to have. There's not a prescribed definition of what marriage is. And I know that when we talk about, legally defining marriage and all of these different types of constraints, that there are some definitions. But really, you and your wife, you and your partner, you and some hypothetical third or fourth or 20th person really get to decide for yourselves and for each other what the future holds. One thing I just want to mention before we get too much further down the road is that as difficult as this moment might feel, and how difficult it is to consider changing the nature of your relationship and exploring these sides of yourselves and all of that, that you are also being cognizant of the fact that if you do bring a third person into this situation, that person is also in a very vulnerable place. And, as you talk about what you're looking for and going out and finding somebody that can help meet that need, I just want to kind of put a bug in your ear and just sort of remind you to be very cognizant of that person's needs and their experience as well. I don't mean to derail what we were talking about, but I think it's really important that people begin to think more and more about the experience of, the third or the outsider or what have you.
Communication is really important.
I completely understand that. I mean, you don't want to bring a third person into the fold and, lead them down a path that they might misunderstand and make it to where they think they're getting this, but really they're not.
Absolutely.
Right.
So that communication, as Melissa said, is vital.
And I think it's also important to remember that the idea of being unfaithful and the idea of cheating, it only really applies if you have not already agreed and consented with your partner, or I should say all partners, beforehand.
That's one thing that I got to thinking about when me and my wife were talking about that, and I told her that I don't think it would be cheating if me and her had both came to an agreement beforehand that this is what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You're correct.
Yes, very, very correct.
And so long as that agreement is made without coercion,
Both sides are on the same page.
But yeah, if you both agree to it, then, and without any pressure, and you're both comfortable with that agreement, then absolutely you're right, 100%. That's not cheating as we really mean to define it.
All right. Well, I have another question, if y'all don't mind.
Sure.
If say for example, if you were to bring a third person into the relationship to give you something that you're desiring, is it necessary to like create boundaries? Like, okay, you can get what you're looking for, but I don't want you doing this. For an example, is it important to set boundaries?
Very, very important. And it's very important to set those boundaries before you even get anything started. to have that social contract and that understanding before anything happens. That way there is no miscommunication, there's no misunderstanding, and everyone is on the same page. That is vital.
For what it's worth, I think that's true of anybody.
Yes.
If you are single right now, looking to date one person or 17 people, going into every relationship with the understanding that there is not a prescribed first date, second date, third date. It's all a constant negotiation. Whether you've been in a marriage for 40 years or you're talking up somebody at a bar, that type of dialogue, I think, is vital and something that is really missing from our culture.
All right. So, for example, when me and my wife got to talking about what we were talking about, I was explaining to her, I said, well, if we're going to do this, I think it's very important that we have this conversation and we talk about what boundaries need to be set. That way we know ahead of time so that we're not having disagreement about it. And one thing that we did, I know I've watched the show before, and I know I heard before on the show you talking about weighing the pros and the cons of it and writing it down on a piece of paper if need be. I remember hearing that a couple of days ago when I was watching it on the show, and I've been binge watching on YouTube, by the way, so yeah.
Hey, we appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love the show, by the way, guys. Y'all do a great job. But anyway, one thing that we did was I told her, I said, well, write down in a notebook the stuff that you would be okay with me doing and the stuff that you wouldn't want me doing. And I know among the some of the things she wouldn't want me doing is she said, it's okay if you kiss this person, but not like intimately, like on the lips or anything, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like boundaries like that, or would you consider boundaries like that, like what you're actually agreeing to do within that situation? Would that be important, or like just boundaries in terms of, okay, how far can you take the situation, like the relationship?
I think if it matters to her and she matters to you, then
which she does.
Then it's all important and all a discussion and boundaries that you need to set, mutually agreed upon boundaries. So if that is a boundary that she wants to have and that's a boundary that you agree to, then that's part of your social contract.
And being prepared to check in with each other along the way and everyone involved is super important, because you may set those kind of contract or those boundaries at one point, and then as you progress through, as you're checking in, someone may be feeling uncomfortable or like this doesn't feel so okay anymore. So being open to the fact that contract can be renegotiated and talked through.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would add on to that is whatever y'all negotiate is great and fine and wonderful. If it's, only on Wednesdays or never on a full moon or whatever you come to and agree on is totally okay. You have the right and the opportunity to negotiate with each other. I would also say that if you are getting the sense from a lot of these boundaries or rules or restrictions that maybe your wife is feeling really hesitant about, opening things up or about changing the nature of your agreement, then be cognizant of that. If she is putting a bunch of really strange rules in there, then that may be a sign that the things that she's agreeing to, she isn't really agreeing to, or maybe she wants to agree to, but is feeling really challenged. Yeah. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable and to push your boundaries, but just make sure that there's not a lot of pressure and that everybody is working together and being open and honest, not just communicating, but communicating in an honest way.
So let me see if I'm understanding this correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm understanding that you're saying is like, okay, if we start talking about, okay, these are what the boundaries are, if she starts setting certain boundaries that, would throw up a red flag, like just be cognizant and aware of how comfortable she is with the situation and, be respectful of that.
Yeah, checking in constantly and being as compassionate as possible. Honestly, anytime a existing relationship dramatically changes the agreements that it's based on, which is kind of what we're talking about here, there's likely to be some growing pains, and that's okay. especially when you're doing something that our culture really looks down on
Rails
and doesn't
against.
understand. There's gonna be some pain. Just to warn you going in, I don't know anybody who's opened up an existing relationship that hasn't felt moments of doubt, moments of judgment, jealousy, and pain. So I want you to go in with your eyes open, but I also know plenty of people, tons and tons of people, that are so glad that they did it. So be aware of that pain, use it as an indicator, but also be brave.
So in terms of like what I've described my situation to be, where I love getting intimate with her, and but I also find myself wanting to have relations with a man as well, would that be something that if my wife is on board with, would that be something that y'all would recommend me looking into if that's something I'm craving?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think-
I mean, there are tons of different ways of exploring that and levels. You know, maybe it isn't immediately jumping on Grindr or going out to a gay bar. Maybe it starts with pornography. Maybe it starts with, a lot of different ways. Know that you have options, and that it's smart to dip your toe in, before you rush into it, and to just take things slow, because so often once we get that starter pistol and we have permission, our eyes get bigger than our stomachs, and we end up in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I know how that is.
But anyway, I didn't mean to step on you, Megan.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like we say sometimes, if it's safe and it's consensual, then have fun. And it sounds like you are getting to the place with your wife where it would be, stay safe, please, and use protection and practice safe sex. But the consent part, it sounds like you and your wife are both together coming to the consent part of the agreement. And if you both are consenting and agreeing to this dynamic changing, there's really no reason for it not to.
All right. Well, I have one more question. This isn't a question about my sexuality. It was. This is more pertaining to a conversation I had with somebody a while back, and I just wanted to get y'all's take on it. And by the way, I do appreciate y'all's input on this. That y'all have been a real big help.
Glad to hear it.
The other thing I wanted to ask about, because this is something that stumped me. I was at work one day, and I was talking to this guy that I was working with, and we got on the topic of religion, and we eventually got onto the topic of LGBT, homosexuality, whatever it is you want to label it as. And one thing he told me that I couldn't really come up with an answer for was he said homosexuality is not natural, because if it was, then women wouldn't be the only ones that could have babies. And I'd like to hear what y'all's thoughts are on that, because when he said that, I was stumped, honestly.
Yeah,
Christy?
sunglasses aren't natural because the sun exists and it feeds plants, and, water
Scars
parks are
your eyes.
unnatural because water is supposed to be on the ground or in the skies, or, you can make whatever justification you want. We can go into detail about all of the different species of animals that practice homosexuality. We can talk about how...
Which is a majority, by the way.
Yeah, and we can talk about how sex in primates and non-human primates is not just about reproduction. It's about socialization. It's about all kinds of different things. So there are about 10 million reasons why that's a pretty ridiculous argument, but I understand it's one that a lot of people hold on to.
It's common.
Well, when I was in the conversation with him, I found that whenever I get on this topic with somebody about it, whether or not it's natural, I oftentimes find myself thinking about the only example I can normally think of, which is a dog. And I brought it to him. I said, well, you are aware that dogs also exhibit this type of behavior. And he said, yeah, they hump. They don't actually have intercourse.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Well, that's such a meaningful distinction
But
when
they
you've
do.
taken a species and inbred it and castrated it and groomed it in all of these different ways. Sure. Plenty of animals practice anal intercourse or different forms of what we would call a homosexual expression. I would just say to your friend, read a book, man, because
Just a book.
yeah.
Go to the Museum of Sex.
Well,
That has a great exhibit on animals.
you know, I've been trying to do some research on that very thing within the past couple of months. Would y'all
Very difficult thing to Google, by the way. Gay animal sex will bring up
So many.
so many search results,
Would-
but
do
so
y'all-
few of them are what you're wanting.
Do y'all have any recommendations of something I could look up to actually research this further to come up with some answers?
One thing that just comes to mind is we're actually going to be interviewing Dr. Hector Garcia here on the show. His book, Alpha God, covers this in some detail. So that might be
I've heard
one place to look.
I was actually watching Talk Heathen.
Yeah, he was
Yep.
on a couple of weeks ago, and he's going to be joining us here pretty soon. So yeah, that might be one place that just comes to the top of my mind. What about y'all?
A book. Just any science or biology or evolutionary textbook worth its salt is going to run through certain variations in species that cover this.
Yeah, Sex at Dawn, another book about evolutionary psychology and primatology, goes into even more detail than Hector's book does. So that's another one I might throw out there.
All right. Well, I think I'm gonna let y'all go, and I do appreciate all the advice and help y'all have given me, and y'all got a great show. Y'all keep doing what you're doing, man. I really appreciate y'all.
Hey, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for calling, and good luck.
Thank y'all so much.
Well, that I think was interesting,
So awesome.
but also, yes, very, very awesome.
I just think that, Kevin reaching out for information, for answers, for support, it sounds like they have a good dialogue about this and are really looking to explore. So it sounds like before he's taking any action, he's wanting to get information and make sure that he's approaching it in a way that is, respectful of what they're trying to do and it's consensual and everything. So I think I just strengths-based. I think that's one.
Yeah, no, I had the same thought that. This kind of situation exists for so many people, and the solution to that problem is usually cheating, sneaking around, lying about it, and yeah, anybody who is approaching it not just from wanting to communicate, but wanting to communicate with a knowledge base and an understanding is pretty remarkable. So I would definitely tip my hat to Kevin and kind of the journey he's on.
And for having the courage to actually, talk to his wife about it and discuss the options and not just stay in the closet, as it were, of, either denial or even worse, like Christy was saying, actually cheating and actually sneaking around without communicating with anyone.
Yeah.
So.
The shame that a lot of people carry with them over not talking openly about these things. I just loved hearing just the ease and comfort by which Kevin was able to talk about these things, and again with resources that he trusted. So Kevin, you're awesome.
Thank you. So with that, let's go ahead and get back to your group. Now, you say you teach sex ed yourself. What would be one of the more common questions that you get that, maybe some people in our audience might be wondering, that is a commonly occurring question that some people may feel embarrassed by asking because they either think they shouldn't be asking the question, or they think, oh, I'm going to sound stupid for not knowing this.
There's such a sense sometimes that like, oh, I can't believe, like, this is a third grader question. I can't believe I don't know the answer to
Right.
it. And then we get even further and further and further down the road without feeling comfortable acknowledging
Asking.
that. When, as you said, so much of us were brought up in the sex ed system that exists that is so full of holes.
Well, and not only in the sex ed system, but also in the religious culture that is just pervasive.
Yeah.
Which sets up really bad ideals and norms.
Yeah. As I mentioned, I teach young people and adults in settings. And so one thing that comes up a lot with young people, and I would say it can come up with adults as well, but it may just sound or be framed a little differently, is around masturbation. Young people will often ask, is masturbation okay? And I think there are lots of adults, and especially folks that have vulvas who, our society has just sent so many mixed and harmful messaging about access to their own bodies and their own pleasure, that sometimes it's just, what does an orgasm feel like? Because these are not experiences that everyone is having because of those the repressed way in which a lot of people are growing up and the messages that they're getting around their ability to be able to experience self-pleasure. So that's one of the common themes, is around masturbation and pleasuring oneself and kind of getting to know your body and enjoying that, which is something that, when we can get to know our bodies, really intimately and understand them and trust them and understand what feels good, what does not feel good, then we have the better chance of being able to communicate that. If we move towards partnered sex, then we can then have those conversations with someone else and advocate for those things. So masturbation is definitely something that, I believe is a helpful tool for those that, feel like they want to explore that. And often that desire to explore it can be inhibited by early messages around, don't do that, don't touch that,
That's wrong. That's a sin. You shouldn't play with that part of your body.
Yeah, I was very much told that excessive masturbation could cause blindness, that it could eventually cause schizophrenia.
Hairy palms.
Yeah, and that's just madness when I think about it now. I didn't even adjust that.
It's not true, y'all. Look.
Yeah. Visual proof.
Right? We survived hairy palms.
Yes, and we're not blind either.
Nope.
And trust me, I've given it a whirl. So
A time or two.
today. So with that, Christy, did you have another question for Melissa?
Yeah, of course. So I really wanted to talk, I guess, a little more about what sex ed needs to look like at home. As kids are growing up, when is the first time to start introducing some of these ideas? And I guess, when we talk about sex ed, what we're really talking about is issues related to gender identity, puberty, all of these different things that we sort of put under the eroticism label that maybe gets in the way. So, with all of that in mind, where do you start?
Yeah, so the best case scenario is that you're not looking at it from that old adage of the talk, right?
Sure, yeah,
Right.
like it's a single uncomfortable conversation.
No, that's uncomfortable because that was made uncomfortable by making it one talk that's late. So ideally, you're starting early and you're having ongoing conversations, and they progress, right? So what parents and caregivers need to understand is that sexuality exists in a lifespan. It's not something that humans age into or become horny teenagers and then all of a sudden that's sexuality.
One day you
just
become a sexual
explodes.
creature.
Yeah.
Right. So when you have infants, they're developing attachment, you're developing bonds, and there's that intimacy there. So again, this isn't about adult sexuality or eroticism, but there are intimate bonds and a connection that is created. And so usually I say, if you're a parent and you have infants, then starting with using accurate terms to talk about body parts in points of care. So when you're changing diapers and you have a child with a penis, you have a child, with a vulva or their genitals, then you use those words. Now I'm going to, change your diaper. And this isn't about, at that stage, asking permission for those things, but you're also laying foundations of consent and the fact that before, bodies are touched, that there's a conversation that happens, and it gets you, the parent, the caregiver, in the habit of using these accurate terms. And then as they progress into, the toddler stages, then those early consent kind of messaging happen. And sometimes, too, it's about how we talk to other people about their access to children that we're raising. So when you have those strangers that just want to reach out and touch or hug or feel entitled to that kind of thing, that's a point where, as a caregiver, you can set that boundary and say, please ask permission, before you reach out and touch. Consent is really important to us in our home, and we want our child to grow up understanding their body autonomy. And so before it's about sex, it's about things like body awareness, so helping your child to understand how they can care for their own bodies, the names of their body parts. Those things support safety, their understanding of a safe and unsafe touch, right, of who trusted adults are in their lives. And also, if you have sibling dynamics or they have other kids or they're in school, then just supporting messaging around consent and making sure that, like, one rule that we have in our home is that nobody says no or stop or sets a boundary more than once. Once someone says no, that's it. That's, and we do ask permission, for, may I give you a hug? So there's not an entitlement, to bodies. That children that I raise are human beings and they deserve respect. And so when you can create that culture early on, that understanding that they have a voice and that they know how to speak up for themselves, then those kinds of things lay that foundation that can make the Me Too movement that we saw for our current adult generation, a lot of us who are tickled past the point of, comfort. There are, again, those experiences before it has anything to do with sex. And then, yes, then it can progress into puberty conversations. We want to talk to kids about media literacy. And so talking about porn, how they can be good digital citizens, those things need to start a lot earlier because kids are gaining access to cell phones and the internet and YouTube and devices. So it's all these, like, foundational things. It's not just one talk, and just creates a deeper connection with your child. So when it does become about sex, it's not awkward because you've already let them know that their curiosities are welcome. And then when it comes to gender identity, just making sure that we're not inhibiting their expression of who they are. That there's not, these are boy toys and these are girl toys, or that this is a color. None of these things are truly gendered. That's all constructed, by our society. So when children are free to express themselves, they're free to experiment and play, then those things support their early development of who they really are and their expression of themselves.
I mean, as we're sitting here, I'm reminded one of us is wearing nail polish and
has long hair.
It's not us. So I think that's a really important message to remember too, is, like you were saying, those early messages. I don't think parents quite realize just how impactful their words can be and exactly which messages the kids take and which they leave.
And their silence.
Yes.
Parents' silence. That's the thing, is that children are learning, whether you want to see it or realize it or not, children are learning about sexuality from the very, very beginning. So those conversations that get avoided, or, one thing I talk a lot about is if I grew up in a house where if sex scenes came on the television,
right, it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
they were like, turn around. And
Putting blankets over the TV for a couple of minutes, or yeah.
Y'all had blankets?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I remember even in high school just being so frustrated by that, because to me, we should be talking about like the messages of these films and whether they have the right values for our kids rather than the specific imagery, you know? So I had dinner a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, maybe when his new daughter, was 2 or 3 years old. And he was kind of complaining to me about how his wife, he said, was really frigid and she was really sexually repressed and uncomfortable. And then he pivoted to talking about his daughter and how she wouldn't have a vagina until she was 22. For now, she had like a hoo-ha or a vajayjay or
a nani or a something. Yeah.
And I mean, we basically just had to walk away from the conversation because there was nothing I could say to help him recognize how tied together those two things are.
And how damaging it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. And he eventually, by the time we wrapped it up, he got to the point of, well, this isn't so much an issue of right or wrong, it's an issue of I'm just uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, so you're uncomfortable, you're the grown-up, grow the fuck up and do something about it. It's wrong not to. And he wasn't ready for that. But, I guess I'm to understand that kind of damage or that kind of language is really damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure, again, from that safety standpoint, that we equip children with the words, with the knowledge, with the resources, with the support, so that if we never want to think that would happen, but if something were to happen that was unsafe to our child, that they would be able to communicate that. They would have the tools to be able to speak that. And so if a child is saying, someone touched my cookie or made me touch, their, wiener or things like that, like this is where, from a legal perspective too, if a case, has to be brought into court, then that gives that wiggle room,
the ambiguity of the terms.
Yeah. So when children can communicate clearly and concisely and use language, because, a common activity that, we do within sex ed classes is, putting words like, ear, nose, legs, and we say, all right, how many, going to give you a minute and write down as many slang terms or other words for these body parts. And then you have them like, ear,
schnoz, lobe. There's not a lot there.
Right. So they get very few, and they're just like, and then you throw up words like penis, like vulva or vagina or breasts, or anus, right? And the flood.
Suddenly.
Oh yeah. The flood of slang terms comes and that's shame. That's shame. Mm-hmm. And that's what's been projected. And so we've got to remove that from our future generations. But something you pointed out that is important is that the journey starts with us, always. And so when we are noticing that discomfort, or we're putting up a boundary, that's information. And that does call for us to kind of go back and look at, where did that come from? Where did I get those messages? Because this is not innate. This is not something that, we're born with, this semblance of shame around these things. This is taught to us. We pick this up, again, on those things that are said, that are not said, that are done, that are not done. So we're always teaching our children about sex and their bodies and relationships, even if we're not having a pointed conversation. They've learned and they've picked up, and they learn how to survive within their environments, who they can talk to, what they can say, what's acceptable, what's appropriate. So I can often have parents who may have like tweens or teens who haven't created an open culture, who may say, I try to talk about these things, and they're like, ew, that's so weird, that's so awkward. And I'm like, that's feedback. It's not that what you're talking about, the subject, is not weird, awkward, or bad.
It's that you feel weird and awkward about discussing it.
An environment has been created that is making this that way.
Yeah, it's the culture in general that's also feeding into that. And so there is going to be a little bit of pushback against that.
Mm-hmm. And just like it's been constructed, it can be deconstructed. It's never too late.
I think that's a good place to pause for a moment, because we actually have another caller.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear from DJ.
DJ,
Hi.
you are on. What would you like to talk about today?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. So I have questions about mismatched libido. My husband and I have been together for about 10 years, and I feel sexual usually about once a month, and I think he feels sexual all the time.
Right.
And especially it's been hard because I have 2 young children, and so I haven't been ovulating or been in a cycle, which I think is usually coincides with when I get horny.
Sure.
And, I'm an atheist myself, but a lot of my friends are religious, and I hear a lot about, the wife is supposed to, service her husband basically and provide for him sexually.
Nope.
And so I'm kind of...
His libido is not your responsibility. But continue.
Well, that's kind of where I'm at is, that, and I feel like society says, well, that's why the husband goes out and cheats because, he's not being satisfied at home. So that's where I'm at. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think my first question for you is similar to actually the question that I asked Kevin, which was, to what extent are you committed to a monogamous relationship? And is changing that dynamic an option for you?
I think I'm much more open because I'm also bisexual. And so, that's something in previous relationships where I have included another female in the relationship. But at the same time, it feels so different because this is like my husband who I see in a different light. And I feel like I would be so jealous to have someone else involved.
Yeah, and again, not to just keep repeating ourselves, but there are degrees to monogamy. So I don't know what kind of understanding y'all have, or if there even is an explicit conversation or an explicit understanding of what is and is not acceptable in terms of, pornography and masturbation and these other things. But yeah, it is a question of, are you looking to change how monogamous the relationship is? Are you looking to change your libido, which is potentially possible? It's not your responsibility. It's not anything that you need to do, but it is something that if you're wanting to do, you might consider, and there are ways of looking at that. And then beyond that, recognizing that life is full of imperfections. And I know that it feels like such a brush off of an answer, but it is very possible for him to simply have less partnered sex than he would maybe want to have. And that's an okay way to go about life. So there are kind of 3 different, takes that you can really look at it from.
Well, I feel like I do want to increase my libido because I feel like he has been gracious in our relationship so far. He's never pushed me to do anything that I didn't want to do. But at the same time, then I'm also a sexual assault survivor. And so, it's trying to figure out where that line is in myself of what I'm willing to do because, maybe I don't feel like having sex, but I want to rally for him. But then, where's that line between because I want to do it or because I feel obligated to do it?
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's very important to point out that there's a difference between changing how often you have sex and changing your libido. And you're not obligated to change either. But it is possible, we can't necessarily like completely rebuild our libidos, but there is some elasticity there. There is some opportunity to potentially talk to a doctor and investigate different things that might be hampering it. Perhaps it's medications that you're on, perhaps it's hormonal imbalances, perhaps it's diet and exercise and all of these different things that can affect
your
it.
mother.
Yeah.
Your mother.
So that's a huge factor.
That can definitely, again, looking
Change
at some of the
your
dynamics
chemistry.
of your relationship, looking at some of the dynamics of the relationship and, who kind of is doing what in the home, how much of certain levels of the workload may be on one partner versus another. Those things can impact, just how much energy a person can have, and even how you at times may view each other. So sometimes that can be a thing to look at, especially for parents.
Yeah, not just the physical component, not just the mental, emotional component, but also the relationship component. So those are all things that may be adjustable and that may affect your libido. But I again want to stress that if that's your goal, great. That is not mandatory goal by any means. You are perfectly welcome to be 100% asexual and celibate if that's who you are or if that's who you choose to be.
Or sex once a month. It's really it's your body, it's your adventure, and I hear what you're saying in terms of being a survivor, and thank you for trusting this space to share that. Being a survivor, there are a lot of other levels and layers that you have to consider, and that also your partner will need to consider in terms of approaching sex and intimacy and touch, all of those things. So being really patient with yourself, with each other. And finding different ways to communicate and also explore intimacy in different ways, not necessarily just about maybe penetrative sex, but other ways that you can explore touch, intimacy, closeness, those things that you love and enjoy about each other that can build towards those other moments of sex, if that's what you're looking for, is like penetrative or other forms of sex.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there's no magic pill that that's going to, make everything perfect. It's a spectrum of options.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate those words.
Of course.
Yeah, I think before we wrap up at all, it's just important to say one more time that this may be a moment in your life. It may be a season that passes. I mean, very much it seems that motherhood is a big part of what you're experiencing. And, it's possible that this is a season that will pass on its own and that it's okay to just enjoy it for what it is. Maybe to make some slight changes, like Melissa said, in the way you look at sex, so that sex doesn't just have to be, intercourse. It can be a lot of other things, so that you're both getting your needs met in ways that feel acceptable. And maybe you do want to make some drastic changes to the way you live your life or to how you see your sexuality. But maybe those changes will come on their own, even if, right now feels a little bit different than you would maybe want it to, or maybe the way he wants it to. And I think it's important to keep those things separate in your mind.
Yeah, I think that we will have a good talk, because I do like that point about, it's not just penetrative sex. And I feel like I probably withhold a lot of other types of intimacy and touch and hugging because I don't want to feel like I'm leading him on.
Yeah.
But I would love to just crawl into bed and snuggle. But it feels like when I do crawl into bed and snuggle, he starts humping me. And then I'm like, oh, I've been breastfeeding and taking care of a toddler, all day long. I really don't want that kind of touch. I just want to lay here and go to bed.
Yeah, and a kiss is only a promise of a kiss. Cuddling is only a promise of cuddling. He may interpret some of these things one way or the other, and that's natural and not unreasonable, but you can also very explicitly discuss these things and say, hey, I would really like to offer this, or I would really like to do this, but not necessarily that. And that's all right. And I guess also to just expand that repertoire. So many couples feel uncomfortable with things like mutual masturbation or anything that isn't, explicitly intercourse. And recognizing that sex can look like a lot of different things. Finally, I would say that I think that a lot of guys would feel a lot differently about sex if every time they had sex, they themselves were penetrated. And that's not to say that women don't enjoy vaginal intercourse or that, that's not a thing that anybody would want, because clearly, of course, it is. But it's exhausting in a way that I don't think a lot of straight men necessarily realize.
Well, and that's, for folks that have vulvas and vaginas, it's usually the clitoral stimulation where orgasm, and the most pleasure happens. And that's often not what is happening without effort through simple penetration of the vagina. So yeah, it's a lot of exploring. It's a lot of exploring your own, body and your own comforts around different types of touch. For me, for example, I really like nipple stimulation. That's information. But I like nipple play, right? But I think it's important that you're talking with your partner about how it makes you feel when, right? So how it makes you feel when he may give you a kiss and expect more. What does that feel like to you? And being able to talk about that at a time when the guard is down, maybe not in the moment when that's happening, but say, I would really love to be able to crawl into bed and cuddle with you because that really makes me feel good. But I need to be able to feel comfortable to set that boundary and to say, but I'm not wanting more right now. And so opening up those lines of communication where you can set those boundaries and you can see that he's respecting that sounds like it's really important to you, and rightfully so. So he needs to understand that through talking it out.
Yeah, it sounds so easy, but boy, talking is hard.
It is hard. It is.
Especially when you're already feeling exhausted, when there's probably already been some heavy sighing, some frustration, this whole thing can start to feel like a real drudgery, which is unfortunate because it's not anything that any of us, we can call it a need, and I feel comfortable calling sex a need, but it's something that really brings pleasure. It is something that you can survive without as an individual. And so it's a shame that so often it feels like an obligation rather than an opportunity. So I understand that it's difficult to change that narrative, but I guess I would encourage you to remember that sex is very much meant to be something that's pleasurable, that's enjoyable, that is building connection rather than creating hostility and discomfort.
I hope.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope that helps you out, DJ.
Yes, thank you so much. And I love this program. I was so excited when I saw you guys on YouTube.
Hey, well, glad to hear it. We really appreciate you calling in and for watching.
Can I also?
Thank you.
Can I also? Are you a reader at all? Do you like books at all?
Yes, yeah.
I have a book recommendation.
Yeah.
So the book Come As You Are, Come.
Oh, okay. That's an important distinction.
Yes.
Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. That is just the what's the right word, right? That's the pillar of, great books around sexuality, especially for folks that have vulvas and vaginas. So I would highly recommend that if your library has it or bookstore. Amazon definitely has it. But sometimes it can be great to, again, connect yourself to some support and around these topics so that you know that you're not alone. There's nothing weird, bad, or wrong with what you're experiencing.
And I'll make sure to throw a link to that in the show notes in the comments section of this episode.
Thank you so much. I will definitely be reading that tonight.
Thank you, and thank you for your call.
Thanks.
So So I know that is an issue that many people have, the mismatched libidos.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I hope that kind of helped some listeners out. And shall we round off the evening with one final call?
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, we've got just a few minutes left, but as quick as we can, we'd love to hear what's on your mind.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I wanted to ask about is I have clinical depression, and so I take antidepressants.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I am afflicted with the most common side effect, which is sexual side effects.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure how to handle this. I have a normal libido, but it's very difficult for me to have actual sex. And I'm not sure, I have a girlfriend and I don't really know how to proceed. I want to have sex again, but it's just, I'm not sure what to do. I don't even know how to talk to her about it.
Sure.
So I was wondering if you had some general advice that could help me out.
Yeah, so just for time's sake, I'll run through a couple of things really quickly. One is to say that, actual sex is definitely a term I would have you maybe think about again. What does that mean for you? Are you talking just about intercourse? You say that your libido is still high, so typically there are three major different types of sexual side effects. It's, loss of interest or libido. It's difficult with an erection, or it can be difficulty reaching orgasm. So it sounds like you're talking about difficulty with erection. Is that the case?
That's the case, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so redefining your concept of sex and recognizing that there is, again, like we've been saying, so much more available to you than, penetration, than intercourse, so many different ways to have sex or express your sexuality, whether we're talking, obviously about things like cunnilingus or just cuddling, mutual masturbation. I mean, all of these different types of things. Learn to explore all of that, and then recognize that different antidepressants are going to affect people different ways, and that it's good to be having a conversation with your doctor about whether this is the right antidepressant for you, knowing that, maybe it is, and maybe this is just a side effect that you need to learn to accommodate and to work around, but that it could be very possible to switch to another drug and 2 months from now feel like this is a problem completely in the past. So make sure that you're communicating that to your doctor. Real quickly, what else can y'all recommend?
Well, I know from personal experience, I also have side effects from my antidepressants, so I feel you on that one. I would say don't give yourself too hard of a time. Don't overthink it. Don't beat yourself up over it, because one, you're not alone, and two, you're really not alone. There's a lot of people who are dealing with the same side effects. As you rightly said, one of the most common side effects. And so...
One of the most common side effects is one of the most commonly prescribed medications.
Yes.
So, you're in good company, and hopefully your partner is open to seeing that and understanding of you and your circumstances.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I
communication.
I have a problem with I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry about that. I was just going to say, so yeah, on that note, communication, I think I heard you say that you may have some discomfort around talking with her at this time about this very openly. And if that's coming from a place of again, you maybe feeling some shame about not performing, in a certain way, but what they just said and normalizing the fact that this is a super common experience. And I think if you approach a conversation just in a very vulnerable and honest honest way, and even just open up and say, this is something I really want to talk to you about, but I'm worried about how you might react to this. Just opening up with a little bit of vulnerability, and then letting her know that this has been something on your mind. She may very well just be happy that it sounds like you really are invested in our intimacy and in wanting us to have a good intimate relationship, and then y'all can talk out what that could look like and the different options for sex and closeness.
I mean, I hope she takes it like that. She's great. It's just we haven't really gotten there yet, so it's hard for me to know exactly how she's going to react.
Yeah, and it's human to have that discomfort. I would like to tell you that, if she can't understand you, then, screw her and you don't need her in your life. But life isn't that simple. We live in a culture where, men are expected to have huge, raging hard-ons and
quote unquote perform.
Yeah, we call it a performance. That's the reality of the culture we live in, and that's the messaging that you've been experiencing for your whole life. That's the messaging that she's been experiencing her whole life. So we're hoping to change the narrative, and we're trusting that somebody that you care about is similarly thinking about these things and is compassionate towards you. But, I also just want to say that it's very human to have that self-doubt. And while we would encourage you to work around it in these different ways, and if it is something that goes beyond, the points that we've briefly hit on today, it's very much something I would encourage you to talk to a therapist, to talk to your prescriber about, because there are a number of different things that can be incredibly helpful. But it's very human to be having those thoughts and having those feelings right now. So we do relate to where you're coming from.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I know you're trying to wrap up, so I'm going to hop off. But I really appreciate you guys taking my call and helping me out and being, kind about this. It's not something I can really be open with, to everybody. But I really appreciate y'all helping me out today.
Yeah, I hear that. And we wish you the greatest of sex, whether that means intercourse or whether for you that means something else. We definitely want to encourage you to go out and have a great sex life. So good luck to you.
Hey, you guys too.
Thank you.
Bye.
I receive.
Just put that out into the universe. Yeah.
So I think that's going to about do us for the evening. I do want to say again, though, that last caller's, Kevin's quote-unquote problem is not out of the ordinary at all. And I think women might be a bit more understanding than you give them credit for. Going back again to the call about the libido, the difference in libidos, I think just having that conversation and opening up that dialogue when you feel that you are ready, when it is time. Don't push yourself too much, but be ready to have that conversation.
Yeah, and just remembering that our sexuality is a beautiful part of our lives, and it's an important one. I mean, we're not here every week for an hour and a half for no reason.
Right. Clearly,
this is an important thing, but we hope that everybody holds on to a little bit of lightness, a little bit of playfulness, and remembers that this is about pleasure. And if we were strictly doing a show on how to make babies, it would be a very different type of conversation that wouldn't include, any of the things that really matter to us as humans.
Right. And with that, I think it's time to take us out. So, Melissa, we have a normal outro that you may have seen. Okay. Are you prepared?
I think so.
Okay. So, whether it is intercourse, whether it is cunnilingus, whether it is with pasties or with nipple clamps.
Yeah, whether it's right after you had kids, whether it's cuddling or Oh, God, whatever. You stole all my best ones. This is why I always go first, Megan. It makes me look smarter.
Yeah, I know. That's why I did it this time. But any of those, whether it's any of those wonderful things, we just would like to remind you to go out and go ahead.
We just want to encourage everybody to give themselves a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
Bye.